Welcome to Session Sunday. Hi guys, it's Jack Edwards and today's session is focusing around attacking. But before we get into this week's video, make sure to leave us a like and subscribe, and if you missed last week's video, click on the link above. Okay, so moving into the first part of this week's session, we're going to be looking at a pattern of play, focusing on attack and so our movement in the final third to score. But before we get into it, let's have a look at the equipment we're using this week and how many players that we're going to be working with. So we have 13 players this week, including a goalkeeper, so 12 outfield players. Obviously, if you have more players, that's fine. We can adapt it by adding more players into certain areas. We can even add defenders into the first part of the session. Okay, so then they can even act as decoys. So the players have obviously got to time their run and obviously adapt to where the defenders are. So obviously making their movements maybe go wider or coming in front of the defenders. So obviously if you have more players, we can adapt to that. If you have less players, we can obviously remove one of the passes. Okay, so it could be that once the ball moves central, instead of playing central again, we play to the striker. So there's different areas where we can try and adapt to it. In terms of the equipment, we're going to be using balls, bibs, cones, and then poles. Okay, so obviously we speak a lot about using the poles or mannequins. Okay, for something for the players to use as like acting as a defender really. So treating it as a defender to get away into space. Okay, so making it more realistic. In terms of the setup for this part of the session, we're having 50 yards of depth. Okay, so it's going to be from the goal line to where the strikers are is going to be 25 yards. Okay, so where the strikers are to the attack midfield is 10 yards, and then there's going to be 5 yards in between these two players here. Okay, and then there's going to be an extra 10 yards from the central players here out to the start point. Okay, so we have 2 players at the start point and 1 player on each other on each other pole. So how you could do it is, the way we've got it is once the players scored, they go to the back of the queue, but you could say that the players go to the back of the other team's queue, so they're getting the finishes and the touches from both sides, so using both feet. So how it's going to start, the players will follow their passes every time. The player out wide is going to open out to receive it. Okay, this player punches the ball in. Okay, as they take their touch out to here. Okay, so now what we're seeing is this player is not available to receive the ball. Okay, because we've got the opposite player on the other team, okay, blocking that pass. So how do we find an alternative to receive it? So the player who's like a deeper line player, okay, will create some space by pulling out into here, okay, where the wide player plays into this player here, who follows their pass. Okay, they're all just following the passes. As they open out, we're looking for this player then to time the run to receive on the run, which is a trigger for the striker as well. So we're looking for this midfielder to play in front of the pole. Okay, so this player creates space to move onto it. Okay, this player will follow their pass. And as this player receives it, we're looking for this run to either come around and across or in front of the defender, so in front of the pole or the mannequin. Okay, so timing that run. So this is going to be a first time pass into space, okay, for the striker to move on to, okay, for a touch and finish or even a first time finish to catch the keeper out by surprise. And then the player who played the ball in, obviously, will go and be the striker. The striker comes to the back of the queue, or they can move to the opposite side. So obviously then we can look to finish from the opposite side and get touches from the opposite way as well. So we'll do it working from this side as well. So we're starting here, okay, this player moves out to create space. This player follows their pass. The player in the middle opens out, okay, to receive the ball. And then this player becomes on. So we start movements out to in, okay, to receive the ball. Okay, this player again, as they move, and they always go out first. And then it can be that run across the defender to receive it, touch and finish. So the main things we're going to be focusing on is that ability to play first time, a good first touch, our receiving skills, our movement to receive and also to create space as well. And then in that final third, having that confidence and that composure on the ball to finish quickly. We will now move into our first animation before moving on to part 2 of this week's session. Now moving into part 2 of this week's session, we're now moving into the first of 2 small-sided games. The first one is going to be focusing on driving into the midfield/final third, okay, to then attack the space in behind. So the setup is going to be 60 yards of depth, okay? So we're going to have 3 20-yard boxes, okay? And then we're going to have 30 yards of width to start with, but you can obviously adapt that if you have more players, if you have less players as well. You don't have to have, let's say you have 5, 2 groups of 5, okay, plus your goalkeeper. You can maybe have 2 zones maybe being 20 yards and 1 zone being a little bit less, or you could have 15-yard zones instead. So how we're going to work it is, we're going to have a 3v2 in this area here, okay? So the incentive for the greens is to win the ball back, okay, and play through the small-sided goals, okay? The incentive for the blues is to get the ball into this final third where it becomes a 4v4 scenario, okay? So whoever drives the ball in, okay, they then start the attack basically. So then we're trying to entice the defenders out to close the person down and get runners in behind to go and attack. So this line here is going to be the offside line. The players are allowed to move into it before the ball moves in there, but obviously if the greens stay high, then we've got to try and work the ball into there or drive into there without being offside. So the coach will play into one of the 3 blues here. Okay, they're looking to manoeuvre the ball. So the players in this zone here looking to stretch the pitch, okay, enable the chance for players to drive into. Okay, so let's say the player out wide here is going to drive into space. Can they take a man away, okay, so they can actually drive in? Or if someone's going to drive in centrally, can they stretch the pitch to allow those channels to move into, which means the centre-backs might look to close down, okay? And then we can try and look to get those movements in behind, okay, to feed the balls through and score. So obviously what we've been looking at in part 1 in terms of playing on the shoulder, making those runs in behind into space to finish, we're now bringing them in now, but obviously more of in a game-based scenario, and we've got to move the ball quickly so we can get the ball into this middle third, okay, but there might not be an option to play first time. So we're looking at that movement, can we create space? So a player might drive in, these players will stay in this zone, okay, it gets played out there, and then where can we find our support now? Can we get somebody on the overlap? Okay, so we're again giving the defender something to think about. Can a player come in short, which might bring in 2 defenders, and then can we play the pass? It doesn't have to be on the floor. Can we play a lob pass into somebody to go into there, and then we get support from the opposite sides. We attack the space quickly, okay, showing that composure in front of goal to make the right decision, and then look to score. If the blues score, again, we reset. We get the players back in here. The greens have their 4, okay, and then we look to go again. So at first, the blues have got to underload in here, and then it becomes equal once one player drives into space. So it's working that ball into an area and having the confidence to take risks, okay, to drive into space, and then having that confidence to play the ball into the final third, to drive into the final third, because obviously if everything's always to feet, okay, and we're always going backwards, it's easy to defend against. If we take the defenders into these areas where they don't want to go, okay, we're going to force them into mistakes, and gaps will eventually appear, okay, especially when we play at speed, and then it's having that confidence to slide those balls into the final third, and then being composed and scoring. We will now move into our next animation before moving on to the final part of this week's session. Okay, now moving into the final part of this week's session. We're now moving into our second small-sided game. This time we're focusing on playing into a middle player, okay, to then go and attack, okay, the defence basically. So in terms of the setup, we're going to have 60 yards of total depth again, okay. We're going to have a 30-yard zone in here, okay, 10 yards for the middle, okay, and then a further 20 yards for this low zone here. So we're going to have 30 yards of width as well. It's going to be 4 versus 3 in here. Our central player who we must play through, okay, and then a 2v2 in here, but obviously there's going to be more players going in. So the blues are aiming to play into the central player, okay, so obviously attacking midfielder, central midfielder, could be a striker dropping in deep. When they play in, they can get 1 player supporting, okay, and that means 1 defender can obviously move in as well, so it can be a 3v3, well a 4v3 situation because the floater can get involved as well. So as soon as they play in, that's the trigger to go and attack, okay, the final third. So then we leave ourselves able to defend the counter-attack, okay, if the ball transitions in a 3v2 scenario, because if the greens win it back, they can use the floater as well. So then they have, they then make it a 6v6 scenario, and they look to score in the small-sided goals. So what we're looking to do is work the ball into the middle, okay? And then what's our thought process? Can the midfielder drive in, okay, and create some space? Can we get support from deep? Okay, so this player can move wide, taking somebody with them. Okay, so then if this player decides to move in and we get a player moving, obviously making it wide out there as well, but the centre-back comes in because they've got to think about, can they look to engage with the ball? But again, it's 4v3, so there's going to be a player spare. So we can even be, the ball travels wide, but this player makes the run. The player's getting attracted to the ball, and then we play a ball across the box for a finish. We can even look to create space, okay? And the defenders get attracted, obviously, to players, for a player to drive into and score. If the goalkeeper saves it or keeps hold of the ball, okay, they then look to transition using the floater straight away, who comes in and then supports. They can move anywhere, so players become live to win the ball back when the Greens have got it. They're looking to manoeuvre it through and then play through the gates. You can even try and swap the teams over after a certain amount of time, but there shouldn't be too much tiredness because it's not too much of an overload in here. It's only a 4v3, and then if they do win the ball back, they're right into goal. So it's having that for the Greens, that ability to win the ball back high, and when the ball does go into the middle, reacting quickly. So for the Blues in here, we're looking to stretch the pitch wide, having the ability for players to, when they receive it, other players making movements, so then we can get it into the middle. The player who plays in doesn't have to be the player who goes and supports. It could be that this player comes in, okay, this player plays in, and the player who's moved inside can make that run into midfield, okay, followed by somebody, but they've took someone away into space. It gives the floater time to turn and look to find a pass. This player could spin out. The defender might get enticed to the ball. This player might spin in themselves or take the defender wide, so it gives them two options to think about. With this player coming through the middle, it could be take it, drive in and score, or setting for the player to make the run, and then we look to finish. So it's having that composure on the ball, that confidence to take risks, to go forward, and then being clinical in that final third using the overload. We will now move into our final animation before concluding this week's session. Thanks for watching this week's video. Don't forget to head over to our website where you can sign up to access all of our exclusive content. And we'll see you next week for another Session Sunday.